Have you ever really stopped to think about what the law actually is? I mean, we think of it as this super rigid, formal thing, right? But it turns out its foundations are way more flexible than you'd think, and they're all tangled up with something we deal with every single day: culture. So let's dive in and unpack the hidden rules that really shape our society, starting with a question about your day.
Seriously, just think about your day so far. I'm willing to bet you've followed dozens, maybe even hundreds of rules without even consciously thinking about it. What comes to mind?
Okay, so maybe you've stopped at a red light. That's a big, obvious one. But what about all the smaller stuff? Like showing up on time for a meeting, saying good morning to your neighbor, or even something as simple as putting your name in a chat to mark your attendance. We're following these little rules constantly, which leads to a really fascinating question. Are all of these things actually the law? We tend to mix up legal rules with social norms, with etiquette, with our own moral codes, so where do we draw the line? What is it that gives a rule that special status, that capital L law?
Well, this table really lays it out. See, if you break a moral rule, the consequence is usually internal, right? You feel guilt, maybe some shame. If you break a fashion rule, your friends might make fun of you or exclude you. But law is totally unique. It is the only system where the consequences, the sanctions, are enforced by the power of the state. That's the bright line. That's what separates law from every other kind of rule.
Let's use a classic example of a powerful social rule. You do not wear white to a wedding. Imagine the mother-in-law shows up in a big white dress on purpose. The guests would be horrified. It would feel like she just committed some kind of serious crime in that social setting. But no police officer is going to show up and write her a ticket. It's an incredibly powerful rule, for sure, but it isn't a law.
And this distinction, it leads us down a much darker, much more complicated path. If a law is just a rule that's enforced by the state, can something be perfectly legal, yet at the same time be profoundly and deeply immoral?
History gives us a chilling and just undeniable answer to that question. In Nazi Germany, every single horrific act, from seizing property to the deportations to concentration camps, was all carried out according to the written law of that regime. On paper, it was all perfectly legal.
And this just perfectly illustrates the massive difference between what lawyers call the formal rule of law, which just means, hey, all the procedures were followed correctly, and the material rule of law, which asks a much bigger question: is this law actually just? So if being technically legal isn't enough, what are the core ingredients that truly make a rule the law?
So what are these core ingredients? Well, it pretty much boils down to 5 things. First, a law has to be universal. It applies to everybody in a certain territory. Second, it's abstract. It's a general rule, not just for one single situation. Third, it has what's called normative power. That's just a fancy way of saying you have to follow it. Fourth, like we said, it's enforced by the state. And finally, number 5, it has to be public, so everyone has a chance to actually know what the rules are.
Okay, so now we have our 5-part definition for what makes a law a law. But this whole formal system doesn't just exist in a vacuum. And this is where it gets really fascinating: how our shared culture is actually the thing that writes the script, giving law its specific shape and its flavor. Around the world, you basically see 2 major approaches. In civil law countries, like most of continental Europe, they rely on these really comprehensive pre-written legal codes. The law is all written down first, and judges just apply it. But then you have common law countries like the UK and the US. Their systems are built on precedent, meaning the decisions that judges made in past cases actually shape and, in a way, create the law itself.
But, some of the most powerful rules that exist aren't written down in any code or in any court decision. That's where we find something called customary law. It's basically what happens when a cultural tradition becomes so established, so deeply ingrained in a society, that it starts being treated with the exact same force as a written law.
For instance, take Hungary. It's not actually written in their constitution, but there is this unbreakable custom that the president must nominate the winning party's candidate for prime minister. It's an unwritten rule, but it has the power of law. And on a global scale, you have this concept called jus cogens. It's a kind of customary international law that says some crimes, like genocide, are just so horrific that they are illegal everywhere, and every single nation has a duty to prosecute them. It's like a shared moral value became an unbreakable legal rule for the entire world.
And all of this, it brings us to a final, pretty radical idea. There's a law professor who apparently starts his class by telling his students one simple thing: law is a fiction.
What could he possibly mean by that? Well, think about it like this.
The laws of nature, like gravity or the fact that fire needs oxygen, those are unchangeable realities of the universe. But legal rules? They're different. They're just stories. Incredibly powerful, elaborate stories that we as a society have collectively agreed to believe in. And here's the most important part. Because we are the ones who wrote these stories, we also have the power to rewrite them.
So you see, from the stoplight on your corner all the way up to the highest international courts, law isn't some external force that's just handed down to us. It's a direct reflection of our culture, our morality, our history. It's a story that we are all constantly writing together. And that leaves us with maybe the most important question of all. If law is a story, who should get to hold the pen?